Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Ryan Ride Mechanic channel. How the heck are you doing today? Alright, on today's video, I want to talk about buying a brand new ride, what's involved, what comes in the new ride contract, what's in there, how does it work, what are we going to get for a new ride. So I want to talk about it today. Let's get into it.
Now get ready. Here we go.
If this is your first time here, make sure you like and subscribe. Do all that stuff downstairs. It does help me out, and I do appreciate it. All right, on today's video, I have the most coveted document everyone is looking for everywhere, and that is this guy right here. This is a new ride purchasing agreement, and I want to talk about what is in this because this is a very secretive thing that nobody ever wants to discuss. What is a new ride purchasing agreement? It is basically the outline that makes a ride. It is the document that's set up between the purchaser and the purchasee of what they are going to get, how it is going to perform, all the aspects in between. So what is one of the reasons why people don't talk about this thing? Well, they don't talk about it because of the very last subject in here, which happens to be the price. No one wants to discuss the price. There's a reason behind that. So to do that, we'll have to get into the actual document itself. So let's discuss this. There are 6 parts to this, but here's how they all start out. Are you ready? You ready to see this? All right, I have obtained this, and I'm going to let you guys see it. So don't freak out and don't go posting this all over the internet everywhere. You ready? There it is. That's the document right there. That defines your ride. That is everything your ride is going to be. Everything that every manufacturer builds starts with this exact document right here. For those of you at home that can't see anything or listening to this in your car, it's a blank piece of paper. There's nothing there. And that is the way most all contracts start. Most all contracts start with a blank piece of paper. So what's been predefined by the manufacturer and everybody else? Nothing. Nothing's been defined at all. So they all start with the same exact thing, a blank piece of paper. The rest is up to the manufacturer, the purchaser, the purchasee, whoever is going to be doing this, depending whether it's a giant park corporation like it's a Six Flags, or if it's a small little mom and pop park, they all start the exact same way. Now, this purchase agreement document is typically set up into roughly 6 sections. So we're going to go over the 6 sections, one section at a time, and really kind of talk about each point, what it would be, what's going to go into it, and what people are going to get out of it. So section number 1, let's start there. This is the equipment selected. Now that sounds very generic, and it's kind of supposed to sound that way. So what is the equipment selected? That is what you are purchasing from the ride manufacturer. For instance, if I go to B&M and I ask for an inverted roller coaster, my equipment selected is going to be an inverted style roller coaster. If I go to Zamperla and I'm looking for a Giant Discovery, then the equipment selected is going to be a Giant Discovery style ride. So it just depends on what you're looking for. In this particular case, we're going to use a roller coaster because that is typically the most variable. Now, when you touch to flat rides and things like that, it's one of those things the manufacturer might already have this document pre-canned and set and ready to go, because realistically, when you purchase a flat ride, there's really nothing for the manufacturer to do with it. There's nothing they like, okay, when you buy the ride, it is a just turnkey thing. It's like, here you go, here it is, it works, have fun. Zamperla is really good at that stuff, especially because they do a lot of traveling rides. A lot of manufacturers do traveling rides, and when you purchase a traveling ride, it pretty much comes in 2 flavors. It comes in, it's going to go into a permanent park, in which case you get the ride, you get the control panel, and some other stuff like that, and then you set it in your park. Or you ask for the traveling version where it might actually come on the trailer, come with the trailer and all the components needed to set it up wherever it's going to sit. But let's talk about roller coasters. When you purchase a roller coaster from a manufacturer, that you're going to, in this area, define what type of roller coaster you're buying, what style, what layout, and all that other stuff. And then you're going to define whether it needs to be a custom layout or if it's going to be, most people would just say it's a cookie cutter, it's a clone layout. So manufacturers typically, when they get these rides ready, they already have a configuration that the ride is supposed to sit in. But if you say, hey, I'm looking for that inverted coaster, but you want to do something brand new that hasn't been done by this manufacturer before. You want it to go into a ravine and you want to be a nice little tight terrain coaster going around the area. That's going to be a custom layout, which is going to come with a custom layout price tag. Custom layouts will also kind of nail you if you have certain areas of the park that you're trying to figure out, like, hey, I want this to go over a lake or something like that. They might need to reinforce part of the helixes, footers, lengthen or shorten things in order to get that ride to fit into that particular footprint. Most manufacturers typically end up having a custom layout when it comes to the station area, because a lot of times station areas are near other areas of the park where pathways and things already exist, and they might have to twist where the station is just to get it to fit better, which if you take a station assembly with the last turn typically in the brake run and you say, well, we need to twist this 15 degrees to fit in there, it's like realistically 2 sections of track have to get remade to do that. One is the piece coming out of the station going to the lift hill. Generally that piece would need to have a bend put into it, or maybe more of a bend or less of a bend put into it depending on where you're going. The second one is actually out on the course somewhere. To line the brakes up and everything else, they would have to redo a helix or 2 out on the track somewhere in order to get the sections to point at each other back at the very end. So this also is a custom layout, but it doesn't come with the full price tag that a ground up custom layout saying we want it to go here, there, this is the area we're looking at. It typically doesn't come with that type of price tag. Section number 2 is typically a payment schedule. Now the payment schedule is the price that you're going to pay for the ride, but is not the price. But I mean, we're taking that value and then we're going to break it up into different sections. A lot of times the payments will get broken up into 3 or 4 different sections. Some parks do it quarterly, they do it on a fiscal quarter, whatever it might be, but the payment schedule is determined how much of the overall price is going to be paid at what point in time. So when you purchase a ride, typically they do not require 100% of the money up front. They only require a percentage of the money up front. Money's hard to get a hold of sometimes, and everybody understands that. So if you're going to go, let's say, to B&M or Intamin or Vekoma or somebody like that, and you say, we are going to purchase a $25 million ride. Well, at the time of signing the new ride purchasing agreement, which is the contract that says that you are going to purchase their ride, you don't have to have all 25 million of that right up front. Actually, you only have to have a portion of it. A lot of times what manufacturers do is they will stipulate that they will need 30 or maybe 40% of the overall price up front. What is that percentage used for? That's the percentage of money that's needed to do things like buy steel, buy equipment, buy things that are used for your ride. So, interestingly enough, whatever that percentage is up front, most of the time it's around 40-ish% of the ride's total value. A lot of times that is kind of the bare amount of money needed to cover the materials that goes into the ride. Not so much all the labor and everything else to actually build the components, but just like when we purchase the steel, it covers the steel that goes into the track and structure. So they may say up front, we need 30% or 40% of the total value to start your ride. It's like, okay, so you pay that money, and in the background, this is one thing manufacturers never really say where this money goes, but in the background, that money would go to actually purchase the steel needed to build the entire track and structure and maybe even the trains. So they buy all the raw materials with it. That PO comes in, that purchase order comes in, and they say, yes, let's take all this stuff, move it over here, and then we're going to put it out there. And then, okay, we're going to start purchasing all the plate steel needed for footer supports, all the tubular steel needed for vertical supports, all the specialized tube that's needed for the rails themselves. And then we're going to just need a ton of plate to manufacture cross ties and gussets and whatever else the ride may require. So then after that, they're going to stipulate that if the ride was to be delivered 6 months after purchasing, it's also in this time that the purchasing agreement is going to line up with this payment schedule, and everything is going to end on when the ride needs to be commissioned, turned over, and set in stone, essentially. So I'm going to say we're going to need 40% of the value up front, and then it's going to take a year. This is also put in the contract. It's going to take a year to build this ride. And at the end of that year, we will require the last payment. But in between, we might have another 2, maybe even 3 payments in there for another 20% of the value, 20% of the value, and then 10% and 10% or something like that. They will have a series of payments set up, and they say by this time, by this point of the fiscal year, the park company, whoever it is going to be paying that manufacturer that amount of money so they can continue forward building that equipment. So the first payment might be used to buy raw materials. Second payment might cover the labor needed to start putting that raw material together. Third payment might cover trains and electronics or something like that. And the fourth payment might cover the commissioning of the ride. Each segment, each setup of that payment is designed to make sure that the manufacturer gets paid. That's the number one thing for every contract, is the manufacturer is going to get paid. Now, if the park were to suddenly fall out and there was a problem and the park had to stop this process for some reason, there is all sorts of penalties, fees, schedules, all that other stuff that is put into that they will not get back. That's just lost money on their end. But the manufacturer has gotten the money out of them enough at that point to say if they needed to stop, they could essentially halt the project and possibly turn around and sell that project to somebody else. Somebody else might have a more like, yes, I can buy that. It's like, okay, then we'll go to here. Much harder to do with those custom layouts where the thing was built custom from the ground up, but the manufacturer could still do it, assuming somebody else could handle that. Lots of changes required in that area as well. But as they go along, they'll come up eventually to that date where the commissioning is supposed to happen and that ride is supposed to be turned over to the park, and that's officially the park's ride at that point. Well, once you get up to that point, there is that last like 10% of the payment-ish, somewhere right around there. And that is actually the last bargaining chip that the park can actually use to hold over the manufacturer's head if something isn't going according to schedule. So you may hear it sometimes when a ride's being put up. They say like, well, if we do this or do that, we might run into a problem. It might set things back. It's like, well, that never really rings in with anybody. What's it mean when something's set back? So the manufacturer couldn't supply the train on time and they had to push back the opening. It's like, okay, well, what's that mean? Well, that's all sorts of lost money for the park. So the park doesn't have much of a leg to stand on except for they still haven't paid the manufacturer that last 10%. So one of the things they'll do is they say, hey, if you can't get us this equipment on time per our purchasing agreement, the way we stated it, then we are not going to pay you that final 10% of that ride's value. And then they start taking percentage off of it. They say, well, if you get it to us by that date, we're only going to pay you 4%. So actually the price of the ride fluidly starts to change depending on the delivery aspect that the manufacturer was able to provide. This happens actually quite a bit. If something gets messed up, they typically the manufacturer isn't paying the park, but the park just isn't paying that money back to the manufacturer. So money is saved. It just depends on how you look at it. It's just not leaving my wallet going to theirs. Number 3, this is the installation location of the equipment. Now, kind of like I touched to in number 2, I was saying that where the ride is placed will affect the cost. This is where number 3 really comes in handy, because I am going to state at this point in time that the ride is going to be put in this location. Now, when you stipulate that, you're going to be giving the manufacturer a topography map of exactly where that ride is going to sit, and they're going to put that ride down there and then adjust to where the datum line is going to be underneath the ride. Now, when rides are built in a CAD model, which means in a computer 3D space, when that ride is built, it is built like sitting here on my desk. It is built on a flat plane. So if I have a lift hill that is 200 feet high, then I have to build tubing to go from there down to the bottom 200 feet in length, and so on and so forth. If I build a very large helix that goes around that back corner over there, then I need to build, I'm going to say it's going to be 3 feet off the ground. So I'm going to build little 3-foot supports all the way around there. Well, all that stuff goes into the bill of materials. It goes into that CAD program, and the manufacturer is able to get the cost out of the back. They say we're going to need this much steel to do this, we're going to need this much tubing and all that stuff. But if that low helix over here that went around that area is no longer 3 feet off the ground. Maybe I have a cliff where I want that helix to go out and over the cliff. Maybe I might need 100, 150 foot supports to go all the way down to the bottom underneath that cliff. Well, that's not just easy to say like, oh yeah, we'll just put 150 foot supports down there, because as the roller coaster goes around that final banking corner right there, it pulls the track and structure that way. That stress might be too much for those vertical supports, and they might have to add other supports, and instead of doing a one vertical, they might need to change it into like an A-frame style. So now you've gone from 3 feet of support to now an A-frame that's over 150 feet tall. The A leg of it might be 200 feet in length. You never know. So this adds a sizable amount of cost to things. Also, if things have to go subterranean, it actually takes some cost away because the supports get very close together and they get very short. But now you have added that you're going to go down into the ground, so the manufacturer starts requiring other things around there, like earth being removed in a certain area. You have to have walls put up around there. Not so much the manufacturer's problem, but that will end up hitting the park's bottom line. Not so much the manufacturer's fault, but that will end up hitting the park's bottom dollar to get that part done. So the cost kind of moves and shifts depending on where that ride is installed. If you're over at a park like Alton Towers, where you want to put that park in the middle of a foresty area and say, well, we're not going to tear down a bunch of trees doing this, then everywhere where those footers land that are supposed to go into the ground and have this hole dug and filled with concrete so you could bolt it to the top of the thing, well, those footers might need to move. Small, but they might need to move, a handful of feet, one direction, 5, 10 feet. Well, if you move things too far apart, you've got to start adding more to support the track. Well, every time you do that, it adds cost. Plus, if you add a ton of footers in an area where the manufacturer didn't intend to it, well, they're going to start adding cost onto the ride because there's now a whole bunch of stuff that they're going to have to re-engineer and figure out. Adding things together, adding too many footers in an area might actually produce more stress in the track, and it might actually start cracking the track prematurely. More support might start cracking. You never know. So they're going to have to reanalyze all those stress analysis in that area, and they're going to have to figure out if adding more footers would be the right thing to do, or if they need to put like B&M used it for a while. They used a big ball joint that just allowed support, but allowed the track to twist on top of that ball joint as the train passed by. They might need to come up with something along those lines in order to fit your particular area where you're installing the ride. And just like I said in section 2, if you need to take part of the ride, if the ride is shaped like a V from the aerial view, if it's shaped kind of like a V, and you said, well, I need it to be less like a V looking down on it and more like an L, and just take this ride and twist part of it around over there, you're going to end up remaking several sections of track in order to get to that new area, which is going to need the math recalculated on a lot of things. So that kind of pushes that area into that it's going to be a custom ride layout, and that's going to come with that more money. So every time you take something away from that manufacturer's print and change it, it ends up costing more money and more money and more money until you're eventually staring at something that needs so much recalculation that they just classify it as a new type of ride, custom layout to that area. Section number 4. This is a thing I get a lot of questions about all the time, and it typically comes with new ride installation. Everyone asks me about the warranty. What type of warranty does a ride have on it? Well, when you think of a warranty, you typically think about it in relation to terms like a car manufacturer, where you buy a car from them and you expect everything to be under warranty. It kind of works that way with rides as well. Just not, it's much more defined. Because a car manufacturer, they say, well, we guarantee that the body's not going to have any problems for, 3 years, and that the drivetrain will be okay for 5 years, and that the tires have no warranty on it. It's kind of the same exact thing. Anything the manufacturer supplies is going to have a warranty on it. Anything that they don't supply is not going to have a warranty on it. So if they supplied all the drive motors, then the drive motors are going to have a warranty on. And they're going to say, as long as you're doing our inspections at our intervals and you can prove that you were doing all the maintenance to it, we will stand behind those drive motors for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, whatever it might be. Same thing with the track and structure. They say, well, we're going to say that track and structure is not going to have any problems for 5 years. And then after that, that's your problem, not theirs. So what happens under warranty work? Well, warranty work basically just means that if the manufacturer said that the track and structure has 5 years warranty on it, and then you say, well, at 3 years in, we started developing cracks into the backbones. It's like, well, that's under warranty. That's got to be it. Well, the manufacturer is going to say, what are you doing with your trains? Are you running them fast? They have to start doing an investigation as to what the park is doing. Because if they told the park that they need to be using all urethane wheels and the train needs to be running a 70-second lap time, and then they go out there and they find out the train's using all nylon wheels, and the train's running 55 seconds around the track, it's like, okay, that's outside of the manufacturer's intent. That's not what they had planned. So they're going to push back on that warranty and they say, no, you guys did that. That's out of what we said. So, and basically what that just means is that the manufacturer will still provide a repair procedure to fix those cracks in the backbone, but it will be up to the park to float all the cost to have that done. As opposed to before, you had developed a true warranty situation, which is where you gone there and said, we developed a crack in this piece of track, and then as you paid someone to come out and they ground into it, they say, oh, look, there was welding, slag, and porosity all inside of it. This was just a bad welding joint right here that started coming apart. They would grind in there just like the manufacturer asked them to, grind into it, grind all the affected material out, and fill it back up and repair it back to normal and then fix the paint on top of it. That's a standard repair procedure. But the difference is if that came from the manufacturer that way, then the park can say, well, that cost us $4,000 to repair that particular section. So then they would turn around to that manufacturer and say, basically, you owe us $4,000. Now, the payment process sometimes does not stop at turnover. So sometimes they turn the ride over and they continue to make payments to the manufacturer. That's kind of an odd one because typically once the ride is up and running with people on it, that ride is 100% paid off to the manufacturer. But sometimes those contracts last longer and they go out further. Manufacturers and parks may enter into something that's more of like a payment plan on that, and they can keep paying further and further off into that thing, but it's typically not that often. Most of the time they arrange that money up front in full to make sure they're paid. But those situations where you're still making payments on it, you would simply just take that $4,000 or $5,000 that it took to make that repair, and you would just take it out of that next payment. If that park was going to pay, $1.8 million to the manufacturer that next time, they would just take that $6,000 just right off of that, $5,000 right off, and then that payment would go through as normal. Warranties are also negotiable, so you can negotiate what you want out of that warranty because you're paying for it in the end. Whether you know it or not, that money that the warranty is covering is being added to the final price at the end. So if you say, I want all of our electronics, all of our motors, all of our gearboxes, I want the train covered, I want the track and structure covered, I want all that stuff 100% covered, no cost to me for 10 years, the manufacturer might say, sure, we can do that. But then they also might say, well, that's going to tag an extra $3 million onto your price tag. Because the manufacturer knows, well, in probably 5 years, you're going to start using electric motors. That motor broke. It's like, okay, so you have to replace it. So they just take that wear and tear usage in that and say you're going to be going through this much per year. And they take out whatever that is, and they just add it to the price tag at the end. And they go, that's your warranty. Warranties typically aren't stretched out that far. We always joked about things where it's like taillight warranty. Like, what's that mean? It's like as long as you could see the taillights of the car that repaired it going down the road, it's like you're under warranty. And then as soon as you can't see those taillights, no more warranty. It's typical of most stuff because the manufacturer is not there watching that equipment like a hawk. They are not. So they install it, they turn it over to the park, and then they leave. And then as soon as they leave, the park starts doing stuff to that ride. What type of stuff? I don't know. Whatever they feel like doing to it. So then when they want to throw something in the warranty claims, it's like, what have you done to that between here and there? And the park says, we didn't do anything. It's like, yeah, I kind of call BS on this one because it looks like you guys were doing something to this. That's also the case when, ride accidents and stuff like that happen too. It's like, what'd you do to that? And the park's always goes, nothing. We didn't do anything to that. And it's like, I don't know. We haven't had this problem anywhere else but your ride. So what are you doing to that ride? Seems a little fishy. Section 5 is going to be an itemized bill of materials. And for this, we just shorten that bill of materials, BOM, down to BOM. That's typically what they're referred to as. So the itemized bill of materials is everything that the park is purchasing from the manufacturer. I know that makes a lot of people scratch their head, like, what do you mean everything that you purchased from the manufacturer? Aren't you purchasing the ride from the manufacturer? You know, depending on what manufacturer you go to, you're not purchasing all of the ride. That's kind of a weird one to think about, but it's actually very, very common. One of the manufacturers that's good at supplying a lot of stuff for their rides is Vekoma. I have a lot of experience with them, right? They supply stuff for their rides. They say, here is the air panels that you're going to use, like in the brakes overhead, the air brakes. Your brakes require this panel that has regulators on it and valves and actuations and everything else. And Vekoma actually supplied those panels as part of the cost of the ride. And they supplied the brakes, and they supplied a lot of the components, the main operator panels, secondary panels, main control cabinets, and all that stuff. But you know what? If you're going to a different manufacturer, or even Vekoma, I mean, it can happen with anybody, you can specify that you don't want their crap, whatever it might be. So if you're going to a manufacturer and you're saying, hey, we want to purchase your equipment, and then you're talking through this process and you're going through this segment, and they say, we supply all of our equipment with, I used to do controls, so I'll poke at the controls. I say, we supply all of our equipment with brand new PLIZ, Klockner, Moeller, whatever you want to call them, controls inside that equipment. And I sit there and go, well, I like Allen Bradley stuff. I know, a lot of people just went, Americans. Yeah, I got it. Don't worry. But it's like, I like Allen Bradley stuff. It's like, okay, so I am going to stipulate in this contract that in the bill of materials that I'm going to stipulate that the manufacturer has to use all Allen Bradley products inside that control system. And I'm also going to stipulate that they have to give me the program when they're done with all of the tags and everything else to it, so I know exactly what's inside that machine. All that comes at a cost. All that's perfectly fine. But that's in that bill of materials that I stipulated they did that. Now, some manufacturers they might not like using that stuff and might push back, and they might say, no, we're not going to do that. But this also affects your warranty. So in the bill of materials, think about it like, we'll go back to a car. Think about this. If you go to a car dealership and you're purchasing a car and they say, you know, those tires have a 30,000 mile warranty on it. It's like, that's cool. Unless you completely run the car off the road, 30,000 miles, if they wear prematurely, we'll replace those tires. And you look at them and you say, well, those are Michelin tires. I don't like Michelin tires. We've had good experience with Goodyear tires, so I want Goodyear tires to be put on this car. The manufacturer will gladly take those tires off and put Goodyears on and sell you those tires as well, but they typically don't stand behind them when it comes to that warranty that we were just talking about. So it's in your best interest to use their stuff. So when it comes to the bill of materials, you can inject your own things, and this is what I want in my equipment, and this is how I want it to work. It might affect your warranty. It will affect your price, the bottom line. It will affect that stuff for sure. So what else is not supplied or supplied by manufacturers? Well, typically all of your drive motors are supplied by the manufacturer, and the big things like the chain, the lift motor, we'll use a standard style roller coaster, the brakes and things like that. Those are supplied. Some of the weird stuff that's not supplied, which a lot of people never think of. Okay, all the cable, wire, air hose, hydraulic lines, whatever is needed to keep that ride operating, that goes all over the ride. None of that is supplied by the manufacturer. Okay, they will tell you what type of wire and cable you need to get from junction A to junction B, and they will tell you roughly how much you will need, but they do not supply that typically. All the conduit that wires go into, that's typically supplied by others, and it actually points that stuff on the prints, and that little word, supplied by others, those little words pop up all over the prints and start doing that. They will point to anchors that go into the ground, footer anchors and things like that, and they will point to those and say supplied by others. Some manufacturers don't even sell the ride with bolts to put the thing together. You have to get the bolts on your own. You have to get it to the manufacturer's standard of what they require. They will call out the size, grade, DIN, all that stuff of the bolts and nuts and washers to put the track and structure together. But the manufacturer might not supply that. they might say that is supplied by others, which means they don't want to clog themselves up with trying to find hardware all over the place. They're just going to put it on the park, and they say, here you go, you guys do that. We were installing a giant Discovery, and we had gone through that stuff. We had gotten everything but we need, but all over the print, we had missed little sections in there that said supplied by others, supplied by others, supplied by others. We had missed that stuff. So we were doing things like we went to set the footers down, and like before we did that, the manufacturer says, where are the giant, they're like spacers. I'm like, what do you mean? And it points to it on the print and calls out, it looks like a giant washer. It's a big chunk of steel. It was like 1.5 inches thick and like 4 inches in diameter. It was this huge thing that went around the footer stud coming out of the ground, because the footer stud was, let's say, 50 millimeters in diameter, but the hole in the track and structure was like, I don't know, we'll just make up a number. We'll say like 80 millimeters in diameter. So you had a differential. You had this small peg coming out of this big hole. So they needed an even bigger metal washer, essentially, to set down on top of the thing. Well, we missed that. So not only did we have to get those, but the problem is that they were custom. They were very custom. So we actually had to go to a machine shop that could get a hold of that steel that they required on that. They called out the grade of steel used. Then they had to cut out all of our washers, essentially, and then we had to send them per the sheet. We had to send them for galvanization, and then they had to be galvanized and given back to us to use on the ride. But those were the little things supplied by others that you need a very good project manager to go in there and watch and look at and go like, oh, okay, we need to get those. Yep, we need the wiring. Yep, we need the cable here. Yes, we need this. Yes, we need that. And you might be jumping through tons of departments to figure this stuff out. It's like, hey, I need wire to go from the control room to the block brakes. Well, on an aerial map, it's like that is, 600 feet. But then the block brakes might be 100 feet in the air. Well, that's 700 feet. And the control room might be another 20 feet in the air. So it's like that's 720 feet. But then you're going to need room to terminate on each side. So it's like, each one of those wires that goes between here and there is now 800 feet of cable that you're going to need to stretch between that, and that money starts adding up really quick. So back to the bill of materials. It is everything you are purchasing. It is also everything that is not included with the ride. And a lot of people would be surprised by a lot of the stuff that gets in there. It's like, oh, B&M, all the air panels. It's like, none of that's supplied. What do you mean? It's like, nope, tanks aren't supplied, panels not supplied, valving's not supplied, the hosing's not supplied. None of that stuff is supplied. They tell you exactly what you need to put it together. They give you the plans and prints to build it yourself. So you can have all that stuff pre-built before the ride ever gets there. Not a big deal. And you can, if you want to throw it in that cost, you can have B&M do it, and B&M will do that. But most of the time, it's much cheaper on these things if you just say, okay, I'll get all that stuff and we'll build the air panels ourselves. Air gates, unless the air gate is tied into the safety system of the ride, and the only thing I could really think of that did this was the boomerang. That's realistically it. Unless the air gate is really tied into the safety system of the ride, the air gates are typically not supplied by the manufacturer. They're supplied by the park. So whatever the park wants to do for air gates. It's also typically whatever the park wants to do for monitoring the air gates as well. We've talked about air gates before on this one. Just a subject that keeps coming up for some reason. I don't know why, but it keeps coming up. The bill of materials also says other things inside there, like weird things that you might not ever think about, like the bill of material comes with a set of prints. It comes with a set of spare parts. It comes with things like that. Weird things like, why would it say that? It's like, it comes with a set of prints because otherwise you don't necessarily get a set of prints. You might get the digital file. You're going to have to go make your own prints. Some of them come with the prints because they don't give you the digital file. That costs extra money, but they'll give you the paper file one time for one cost. So you might get something weird in the bill of materials that's a red flag that's like, what? What do you mean? It's like, yeah, you can't have the digital copy for that. It's like, no. We want the digital copy. Put it into the bill of materials. Again, every one of these parts, every one of these contracts at every level is negotiable. You can negotiate anything you want to. It all affects the price. Speaking of price, section number 6, the most important section, is the price. So what does the price include? The price included everything that was listed in this document. Everything in this document is determined at the end in the price. So if you've put all that stuff there and you said we want all this, it's like, okay, this is going to be your price. If you had to move the track all over the place to allow it to fit in your footprint, that goes under that custom layout, and they're going to affect that in the price. If you wanted all the spare parts put into the bill of materials, that affects your price at the end. It's because of all these variations that one park might ask for. You can see how this would make the price go all over the place. So if you wanted spare parts included, if you wanted an extra long warranty, if you had things that where you needed to modify the track to make the area's supports much longer in one area, or you need to bend the track to figure out it need to go in a certain area that way, everything affects the price. It affects the bottom line. And this is actually the main reason why the manufacturers won't talk about the price of their ride. Because I can say, hey, on this piece of paper, the price says it's $26 million. It's like, okay, great. Another park can approach the manufacturer and say, well, we want that exact same ride, but we just want it to sit here on this flat piece of ground. And we don't want spare parts. We don't, whatever warranty comes with it. If the manufacturer says, we'll stand behind the trains and the track and structure for 2 years, it's like, well, that's fine. And they don't put anything else into that contract at all. And the manufacturer just writes the contract for them. That ride might cost that park $21 million. Might be a $5 million difference that just because what's negotiated in that purchasing agreement. So that could be one of those things. Maybe the park that was building that first one, maybe they needed that ride rushed. Maybe they needed it put together. Typically, rides are purchased about 3 years in advance. That's typically when rides are actually purchased, 3 years in advance of open. But maybe they were in a rush and they're like, we need this ride sooner than that. So they were going to pay for all sorts of overtime and everything else. Might have tagged on an extra $5 or $6 million onto that price tag. So the manufacturer is not going to sit there and point to that ride and say, well, yeah, that cost them $26 million, because that means the next year they might be pointing at that exact same ride at another park saying, well, yeah, that one only cost $20 million. Now, the park that paid $26 million is now going to be upset. Why did we pay $26 million and you only charged them $20 million for that? It's like, well, the manufacturer can easily explain because they didn't put any of that crap inside the purchasing agreement that you guys did. But that park that paid $26 million is still not going to be happy about that response. They're still not going to like that. So they're going to have to, so that was one of the main reasons why the manufacturer doesn't talk price tags. They will give you a rough price of what that ride would be sitting on flat level ground, written to the contract the way they have it. And that's not an exact number. Roughly, $9 million. It's about $9 million for that. Okay, that sounds good. About $9 million. Yep, that's about what it is. What the park actually paid for that is typically a very closely guarded secret. Every park thinks they're getting a deal, so it doesn't matter if they are or are not. That's why people typically just don't talk about price. It's the same thing. I used to have employees that would talk about their pay wages. I'm like, do not talk about your pay with any other person, because all it does is creates animosity and just makes other people mad. If you get a guy that hires in a year after you and is getting paid a couple dollars an hour more than you get very upset about that. I've been here for a year longer than that guy. Why is that guy getting paid more than I? Because he knows more. He's doing more. His skills are more valuable than your skills. You didn't even try to negotiate your pay. So that's the same thing the manufacturer does. It's like, hey, how much does that ride cost? It costs about $16 million. Well, what did that park pay for it? We won't. There's a great clip of Sandor from Intamin when they were overshooting Accelerator, they're basically planning to see if the Top Thrill Dragster could actually work. There was a video of him standing there at the exit to Accelerator, and someone was asking him some questions, and they mentioned the price tag, and I remember what the price was. They're like, oh, and you just have to pay $12 million for it. And then Sandor just kind of like stone-faced, just kind of like, and turned around and went back.
This one's only 11 million, right?
He knew better not to say anything about the price of that ride. Even my own rides, I know the installation price after installation. It's like, yeah, we purchased the ride for $16 million. It cost $10 million to install it. So I've told people that's a $26 million roller coaster sitting there. And the PR department was like, what? What did you tell them? You told them how much? And I said, told them $26 million. And they started flipping out. They're like, oh my gosh, but you can't just go around saying that. And they started looking at it. It's like, well, once you, okay, but just don't tell anybody that again. The ride cost $26 million. I got that number from the newspaper. I wasn't even working there when that ride was installed. And the newspaper said it was a $26 million ride. So I'm like, all right, it's $26 million. But man, internal parks just flip out when you actually broadcast a number out there. They do not like that at all. So one of the reasons why prices aren't really discussed that much, either from the manufacturer or from the park. I think that's going to do it for this video. So what type of things would you put into a new ride purchasing agreement? What would you put in there? What would you stipulate? What would you want from a new ride? Because you'll see, I can almost guarantee you, I'm going to ask this question. You put down what you would want on a new ride. Just give some bullet points and a short little sentence, this, that. You could put it into the sections 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sure, you could do that, although 6 you have no control over because that's the manufacturer's. And as you start looking down in the comments, I bet you will see people's what they want out of a ride is crazy different between just one person to the other. One thing that you can't push on a manufacturer, when I'm thinking about these comments that are about to be coming, is you can't get their throughput on there. The throughput is really up to the park. The manufacturer will design the ride with a theoretical throughput, and they say this ride running at this dispatch frequency, which they all plan out, they say this should be able to put through 1,100 people per hour. All right, now, if they sell it to the park and the park says 1,100 people an hour and they get it out there and they can only run 5 people an hour through the thing, that's 99.999% of the time the park's problem. That's the park's staffing levels, the park's maintenance issues, the park's training. It's not the manufacturer's problem. I know. We installed one, they were like, oh, this will do 400 people an hour. And we did like 480 or something like that through there. For a ride of like 400 people an hour to go up to almost 500 was pretty awesome. And that was actually all thanks to the operations crew. The operations crew just busted their butt to get those extra numbers out of there. But that number even impressed the manufacturer. They were like, oh, maybe we should go through and redo those numbers for this particular ride. So it's like, you'd have to have an awesome crew like these operators because they were pretty awesome at that ride. All right. Like, subscribe, do all that stuff downstairs. It does help me out. I do appreciate it. If you want to contact me, you can always just leave a comment down below. I try to read through everything. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. Things get busy. If you want to email me, RyanTheRideMechanic@yahoo.com. It's really simple. All one word together. RyanTheRideMechanic@yahoo.com. And oh, I forgot. Section 7. Stay off the air gates. Bye.